day. We're at the último tironcito, and we have a treat. We are going to hear from this dynamic group. And I really had a treat listening to Dr. Shaw this morning. And he told me, Dora, I only want you to say 3 sentences about me. But he has a very impressive bio, and I am going to say a few words about him. First of all, he is entertaining. He is funny. He is eloquent. He's motivational. And he's a lot of fun. You are a lot of fun.
Hey, what's going on here?
He says this is not going to be a fun session. But really, Dr. Kenneth Shaw is a consultant for the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges. He's a nationally respected administrator and educator. He recently retired as the 10th Chancellor of Syracuse University, and he served as a university president for nearly 30 years, and he's still here. Prior to joining Syracuse in 1991, Dr. Shaw was president of the University of Wisconsin system based in Madison, Wisconsin. He presided over the 26 campus system, which serves more than 160,000 students. He is the recipient of many honorary degrees from 8 universities and was awarded the NCAA's Silver Anniversary Award in 1986. Ladies and gentlemen, this is only a glimpse of his impressive bios. Put your hands together and welcome my friend, Dr. Shaw.
Finally, somebody loves me. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to, we don't have any fruit to give you, but what we will do is we're going to talk about the leadership dynamic. I know that some of you are not in systems. Many of you are. Some of the community colleges are not. But there are 5 critical areas that we're going to talk about. And I'm going to tell you about the procedure first, and I'm going to introduce my highly esteemed colleagues, and then we'll get started. But we're going to talk about 5 critical areas, and I will do that very quickly with each area. Then my colleagues will kind of talk about them from the standpoint of real-world activities. And after that, we'll go on to the next one. And we hope to have all this done in time for you to ask some really good questions. And I'm counting on 20 to 25 minutes of really good questions. We don't want to let you out of here early because, well, we just wouldn't want to do that. So now let me introduce my colleagues who will, after I introduce both of them, I'm going to ask them just to tell you a little bit about the institution that they represent, so you know where they're coming from, and then we will get started. My first colleague is Jarvis Hollingsworth. Counselor Hollingsworth is really a very, very highly regarded lawyer. He's been past chair of the Houston System Board. This is his last term as a regent, 2009 to 2015. He's a partner in Bracewell and Giuliani law firms. He's truly one of Texas' best lawyers, and he's also a military award winner. So here you have somebody who understands large-scale institutions from the standpoint of the military, from the legal perception area, and also, of course, from higher education and community affairs. My other colleague, Roberto Saturday, since 2003 has been a member of Alamo College Board, the Alamo College Board of Trustees. He's been the chair, he's been the vice chair. The governor has appointed him to a task force on incentives in higher education, always a good thing. He's chair-elect of the board of directors for the Association of Community College Trustees. That's national, and that's pretty highly regarded stuff. He's a highly involved community leader. These people have been through a lot, and they're going to really provide the substance to our discussion this afternoon, as well as the questions and comments that you have. Jarvis, if you just take a minute to tell us a little bit about the University of Houston.
Thank you, Buzz, and thank you guys for being here. I I do want to say before I get started that I hadn't been called a treat in a long time. So,
It's been a long time, man.
if ever. Again, my name's Jarvis Hollingsworth, and I'm fortunate to be the immediate past chairman of the Board of Regents of the University of Houston, with 1 year remaining on my term, and I'm looking forward to giving someone else the opportunity to excel. But it's been a great, great 5 years. I have to introduce, we're the board that got referred to several times that almost have a quorum here, but we really don't. I'm gonna start with our student regent, Asad Shah, who's here with us, who, as you know, or as you may know, on university's Board of Regents, the governor appoints a regent each year for a 1-year term that's a sitting student. So Asad is our student regent for the year, is doing a great job. Next to him is Spencer Armour, who is another regent on our board. Next to Spencer is Paula Mendoza, who's on our board, and next to Paula is Beth Madison. So thank you guys for being here. The University of Houston system is a 4-university system with a little less than 70,000 students. 4 universities, University of Houston Clear Lake, University of Houston Downtown, and the University of Houston flagship main campus are all in the greater Houston metropolitan area. And then we have our 4th university, which is University of Houston at Victoria. These are 4 independently accredited institutions, each with their own president and their own cabinets. As we'll get into a little bit during this panel, each of these universities have independent mission standards, so we as a board are challenged with providing the guidance and policymaking, rulemaking for a system of sometimes disparate and different entities. And we'll talk a bit more about that. The University of Houston, just briefly, is an interesting university. We are the 2nd most diverse university in the nation. No ethnicity makes up a majority. We are both Hispanic serving and Asian American serving, which means that more than 25% of our student body are either Asian or Hispanic. We're almost 20% African American. So we really are a university that looks like the rest of the world, and we think what the world will be like going forward. I'll take a brief moment and brag just a bit. We are a Carnegie designated high research institution. In 2011, we were named that. We are both in U.S. News World Report and the Princeton Review of Best Colleges and Universities. We also graduate students. We're 7th in the country for graduating students with the least amount of debt. So we're also very, very proud of that. We have a phenomenal chancellor who just yesterday was named the chairman of the, or chairwoman of the Dallas Regional Federal Reserve, and is also the incoming president of ACE. Bill Powers is the outgoing president of the University of Texas, and Renu Couture, our president, is our chancellor and president, is the incoming president. She also serves as both the chancellor of the University of Houston system as well as the president of the flagship campus, University of Houston. And I will point out a former regent who is out here. I just looked and saw him, Jacob Monte, who is also now on the board of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. So great to have him here as well. Thank you.
Roberto.
Well, before I came up here, I was having a lot of fun, but now listening to Jarvis, I'm getting butterflies. I'm getting nervous up here. Good afternoon, everyone. I have the privilege of serving the Alamo Colleges in San Antonio, Texas. This is my 12th year on that board. And I want to introduce someone myself. That's Bruce Leslie, who's working on his cell phone right now, conducting business, which he does all the time. I actually tell him that he's playing video games on his computer while we're deliberating as a board, but he takes it all in stride. Anyway, our organization is a 5-college system. We have outlying centers. We are unique in the sense that we have 5 separately accredited colleges. Dallas is the only other one that has it in the state of Texas, and that is a cumbersome situation, as Ms. Valek is saying. Yeah, it is. So that's been one of the challenges, but also it has helped us become very engaged in terms of what the agenda is for community colleges. We have on an average of between 90 to 100,000 students on a daily basis. We have, again, centers everywhere. We have a center in Kerrville, we have a center in New Braunfels, and a semi-center in Floresville. That one needs to develop a little bit more. And then centers throughout our city. We are a Hispanic serving institution, and we have the only community college that's a black designated community college in the nation, which is unbelievable, I think, St. Philip's. So again, this is my 12th year. I will tell you that my service on this board began in a very interesting way, which I'll kind of elaborate later on. When I was appointed, I was following a trustee that had gone to jail for 7 years for his service on the board. And he was accompanying about 3 other guys that went the same direction. So I can tell you that the previous presentation meant a lot to me in terms of what we should and should not do. Thank you, Buzz.
Thank you, Roberto. I'm from Illinois, folks, and I had a cartoon from one of my presentations. There are 2 prisoners in a bunk, one below, one above, and one says, "That's what happens when you set the standards too high." 2 governors. So here we go, folks. What we're going to do is I'll make brief presentations for each of these areas, and then we'll have a little bit of comments probably between the 3 of us, about 5 or 6 minutes, and we'll go on to the next one. But how do we all get along and work together? Well, that's important. And leadership, by the way, is not one individual. It's not 2 individuals. One of the things that makes this country as great as it is that we really do develop leaders. And we've got so many ways, whether it's boards, whether it's being on the Rotary, whether it's in a community action agency or whatever. And so we need lots of leaders. We need millions of them, and we have to work together to do that. Okay, but we start with some leadership principles. My experience with large bureaucracies, and let's face it, if you have 70,000 students, you're a bureaucracy, is that the worst thing a person can do is make a mistake. And the worst thing we can do to stifle innovation is punish people for mistakes. So here it is. I need to blame someone for their failure. Use a plunger of blame. It's the latest technology for randomly distributing blame, and there he goes. He gets the plunger. So remember that when you have people that are going by the book and not making judgments, they're probably afraid of making a mistake. Oh, and here's passion in leadership. I want employees who are passionate. Give me this job, or so help me God, I will cut off my ear. And I'm a people person. That's not bad. Okay, here we go. Here's the 5 critical areas of importance. You see them up there? Provide a collective, unified voice. I won't read them. We'll go over each one. But that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to make a little presentation, make a comment, and then my guys here are going to tell you a little bit about the real world that they've experienced. Okay, so if you're a coordinating board or a system board, you're to advocate for all the institutions equally. That doesn't mean the same, but it means to treat people equally as a collective asset to serve the state. A collective asset, okay? Not just the little pieces. Speak with one voice as a board. That's important. It was said by the lawyers earlier that it's one thing to disagree and to have a vote that's 5-4. It's another thing to have, after it's all over, to have there be any confusion about what the board has decided to do. The commissioner and the system heads, their job is to create a sense of broader purpose. And please understand that your system head doesn't have a football team. Probably doesn't have, if he does, or she does, not a large endowment, unless all of your endowments flow through the system. Needs to develop a relationship of trust and create an expectation of professional integrity in working with campus leaders. They need to get along and work together, and creating an environment that discourages end runs. That's not easy. Your presidents or institutional executives, Have an approach to leadership that regards other campuses as partners rather than competitors. Avoid end runs and communicate the importance of the system, not just my school. 2 quick stories. One was in the news about a year and a half ago at Wisconsin, where the Madison, which is clearly the flagship school of these 13 four-year plus schools, the head of the system, of the campus decided that they should have their own governing board. And the governor thought it was a good idea and that people would like it. And somebody asked me, I stay out of these things, but somebody asked me privately, and I said, no, it's a terrible idea because every one of these 13 places has its own constituency. And the chancellor doesn't know what she's getting into. Well, that's exactly what happened, because it wasn't seen as a nice thing for the person to do, but rather, here we are working together and you're trying to pull us apart. And she then left soon after that. The other one, and I was asked to give a couple examples, the other one had to do with my first job as a president, real young guy, 37 years old, don't look a different, day older now, but but I was at the smaller of the campuses and still not knowing what I was doing first year, but I was at the urban area, okay? So I had a lot of politicians that worked with me. And so I get a call from Senator Sam. Senator Sam says, Buzzy, that's what he called me, Buzzy, X just put in for $500,000 for a project. That X was at the larger of the campuses. What should I do? And I said, gee, let me think a second. I don't think that was on the system list as a priority. Well, what do I do, Buzzy? I said, well, I'd oppose it. It was killed. Okay. I had to answer to the larger campus, but it would have been nice if the system head and the board itself would have basically said, you don't do that. Okay, those are my examples. Now you guys tell us a little bit about the real world that you're experiencing.
Well, I'd like to, one example that comes to mind, it's interesting when you've got 4 universities in a system, each with their own hierarchy, their presidents, their chief academic officers, their general counsels, et cetera. Each of them are advocates for their institution. And that's what you expect them to be. But in many situations, it creates challenges for your board who are trying to promulgate policies that will apply equally across all of them. One of the recent examples we had at the University of Houston that we had to manage very carefully because many times when you have these different officers who are zealously representing their particular universities, sometimes it can present conflict. And so you've always got to be able to make each of your constituents in their respective areas feel like they're being listened to. You got to feel like you've got a process that's collaborative, that's fair to all of them. Probably other than you university systems out there, for your community college board members out there, you've got board members who are in different districts, who are elected from those districts. They have capital projects in those districts. There's limited amounts of resources available, so you have good, wholesome, sometimes competition between different regions and different board members that may live in different areas with different needs and who are being somewhat feel like they're accountable to their constituents to bring the best resources or more, as many as they can to their respective district. At the University of Houston, we recently had a situation where a decision was made by the board after a task force was created to create a branch campus in one of our areas where we had, prior to that, just a teaching institution. And what that meant was that some of the other universities were either going to have to contract or expand with respect to the services that they were going to be able to provide in that area. So what we ended up doing was creating a task force that was equally represented from each of the university systems that would be impacted, both positively and negatively. It also included the regents who were in those particular areas. And at the end of the day, the board was able to come up with a process that wasn't equally and universally loved by all, but it was unanimously approved by our board to include the board members who were in the areas that were being restricted with respect to programming or were being asked to make changes. And it's just one of the inherent difficulties. The other thing, too, remember, is that these are 4 independent institutions with 4 different admission standards. They're independently accredited. So there are always discussions about access, who has access, who doesn't, better students, poor students, who's being served in those communities. Cost is always an issue. Is that going to cause our prices to go up on our tuition for those students in certain areas who may or may not be able to afford as much? So it really was a little bit of a conundrum for us. The task force helped us in working through a lot of those thorny issues and making a recommendation to the board. And at the end of the day, the board unanimously came together to approve the changes.
It worked out well?
It did.
Good.
I mean, we're still undergoing.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a 2 to 5 year
Yeah,
process.
I understood.
But we're going to
Yeah.
get there, and
Good.
we think we're
Roberto,
solid.
have you ever had an end run in your system?
So many, I can't even count.
Okay. How are they handled?
Well, let me give you some context. When I first came on the board, it took about 1.5 years for the full board to come together. And we knew we had to do something about all the dysfunction that was in the governance structure of our system. And so we had a retreat, and we started talking about what are we going to do? I mean, you got 5 separate colleges. They're all doing their own thing, not wanting to become part of a system. How are we going to cut costs so that, because of the consolidation needs to happen, where are we going with this? And it became very clear to us that we needed a vision of some kind. And so, and this is going to sound like a commercial for ACCT, but we all went to a GLI, or Government Leadership Institute in Washington, D.C. And we had a chance to sit and talk about governance and get guidance from them. So when we came back, again, we needed to talk about, we need to come together and have our own voice, a common voice. And so we started thinking about how do we do that? And we made a pact, basically saying, the chairman speaks for everybody, and that's understood. If you don't agree with something, well then, that's fine. Vote no, but then it's over. And we're not going to hold any grudges or anything like that because of the decision. But I think the seminal point came when our chancellor, it wasn't Bruce, had a stroke, and we were left rudderless, basically. And so it was so vital for us to stay together so that we could communicate to not only the faculty, but the community that we were one. And the other thing that we did was that we decided that we would not think in terms of districts. There are 9 districts in San Antonio. I'm District 5, and my district is in the northwest side of the county. But we made a pact that we would always vote for the best interest of San Antonio rather than one particular district, because we felt that it would be too segmenting and divisive if we did it any other way. And so I think those kinds of initial decisions helped us tremendously. But we had to hire Bruce Leslie. And Bruce Leslie is transformational. He's not going to sit around and let things just sit there. And so Buzz, he really started doing some things that were very controversial.
New York boy, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but he's trying to become Texan like we discussed
I can
earlier.
tell, yeah.
But in any case, Bruce started doing some things, and he brought us together and says, it's good that you're speaking with the voice because we're going to have to do some things. And his first thing, he says, every time I turn over a rock, there's a snake. And so I said, well, okay, well, how long is it going to take? Because I was chair when we hired him. And he says, it's going to take us 5 years. And I said, no, it's not. It's going to take, like next year we want this to happen. And he said, no, you don't understand. And he said a word that I really have dissonance with, and that's culture. The culture needs to change. And I'm like, culture?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Right.
We've got needs right now. And so because of his stance and because of our being able to talk in one voice, we weathered a lot of storms. And I won't tell him about the big storm, but nonetheless, he's gone through a lot, and we have been able to hold together and support the decisions.
And he has a former chairman that respects what he's done and gave him support. I'm going to move on to the next one as I get up. One thing about end runs that I did at Wisconsin, which I was never challenged. If I'd have been challenged, I don't know what I would have done politically. But invariably what you get with your campus heads is, look, I'm not behind this initiative. Our legislators want this to happen, and I can't be in the way of it. And my answer always was, I really understand. You got a serious problem there, and I wouldn't want you to get in trouble with your legislators. Here's how we'll handle it. For every dollar you get through an end run, I deduct it from your operating budget. And you can have that money that you get as a special thing, but you're going to have that much less. And I was never challenged, fortunately, because it might have been politically a dumb thing to do. Okay, so then we're going to go to, building interdependent support. My colleagues are going to help me here too. Provide support and guidance for the system head. That's the coordinating board. Guidance. You did that. You guys do that when you have a new person, and you can tell the support. You can feel the support from these two people. Provide support and guidance to the campus executives. That means you have to a system head who's sensitive to their local kinds of situations, and help a newly appointed system head become familiar. You're the one that made Bruce wear cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. I know. He told me. So he was trying to help poor guy out. But that's what you do. Coordinating boards and system boards, sometimes you should take the heat. It's still going to be on your CEO, but sometimes you have to make it clear that you're behind him 100%. And have confidence in these people in terms of their professional expertise. If you don't, your problem is not to micromanage or to criticize them publicly. Your problem is to deal with it through the evaluative process. Things don't get better. It's back to what was said earlier many times. What is your biggest job? Hiring, supporting, evaluating, and ultimately doing something with your president if it's not working out. So communicate your concerns. Then, if build leadership with a full board, that's important, with having committee chairs that rotate often enough, and insist that the board members work for the benefit of the system. And we talked about this earlier today, that the special interest board member is always going to be a problem because it's the larger whole that's important. System head, get that of persons. Encourage an appropriate relationship between the executives and the governing board. That's tough too. Because if you're an insecure system head, you wonder what that president or chancellor is saying to that board member about whatever. You got to be more secure in that, and you have to give people the flexibility to do things, but to have the kind of relationship where you know that you'll be told if there's a problem coming up. Work with board campus chief executives to determine the amount and kind of information. That's tough. You're an information-loaded state, and that's good. But this is something you work through so that you're not creating information needs that require hiring a lot of people. And you're the system head, you're the chief internal communicator. And you're supporting that campus leadership. That's not always easy. I can remember in one of my jobs at Southern Illinois when I was the head of that system, having to sit there with great pride when my campus president spoke to a bunch of community leaders. I was really proud, but I really wished I could have done it. But that wasn't my job. Support campus leadership, yes indeed. And your institutional executives. Donna Shalala, you've heard her name before. Donna is now the president of the University. I was instrumental in hiring Donna at Madison when I was the system head. Donna always called me boss publicly. Now, if you know Donna, if anybody here knows Donna Shalala, if I were the boss, boy, I'd hate to be something else because she has a mind of her own. She's really a wonderful person. She was great to work with, but she made clear that we're going to have the kind of relationship that would make it work. Support the system. Donna always publicly supported the system. Got what she needed and got what she wanted, but she did it in the right way. And Then, of course, the difficult challenge between the flagship president and the system head. I think of one institution a couple of them that I worked with recently that had two schools that thought they were flagship and the others just weren't flagship in the minds of those two. And it really caused a lot of problems because the two campus heads did not want any power to go to the system head, any. And it was so underdeveloped that when I spoke to the board about their responsibilities and said, your chancellor, your head should be annually evaluating these people, and there should be a 5-year review, a 360. And so that was a part of the announcement. The new person came in. These two people said, what? We're going to be evaluated by this system head? What kind of place is this? That's not good. The board has to deal with that kind of stuff. Flagship president and system head relations, that's another thing. Okay, one quickie, and then I'm going to get stories from my friends. When I was a system head in Illinois, for a small system, Southern Illinois, we'd get together, and here's the U of I, here's us, and here's the others. And they were all pretty close to us, not near the University of Illinois, and we weren't. And I had, somewhere in undergraduate school, read an article called The Tragedy of the Commons. And it was, I think the guy he's probably more conservative than I could ever be, but or more liberal. I'm not sure which he was. But the story goes like this. You've got 10 acres of choice land, and you've got 10 people that have 10 sheep, and they all share this land, and the sheep graze on it, and everybody's happy. And in the true spirit of entrepreneurship, one says, you know what? I'm going to add another sheep. Now, I realize that there'll be a little less stuff for my other 10, but you know what? All the other people are sharing in that part. And so I add mine, someone else looks over, I think I'm going to do that. And pretty soon everybody's done it, and pretty soon there's nothing for the sheep to eat. And the idea was, that's what happens if you don't commit to a larger goal. And it was funny because we had a meeting of the people that were campus heads, system heads at that time with the coordinating board, and they all kidded me about the tragedy of commons. They didn't remember what it was, but they thought it was funny. Anyhow, boys, take over.
A couple things on this issue.
Buzz and the boys.
Yeah, I guess that's us.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, we have the unique situation where the system chancellor and the president of our flagship those are held by one person. So instead of us having this conflict, we have just the opposite. We have a situation where we have to work overtime to ensure that the other universities in the system don't feel like the chancellor is more biased toward the flagship system. Yeah. The flagship university. So we have system leadership councils at each campus that are comprised of that management system. They meet, talk about the issues going on in their respective campuses. Those report up to the chancellor, and she typically reports to the board on those issues. So it's making sure that those campuses, or those universities, if you will, feel like they're listened to, they have a platform to air their differences and have a meaningful dialogue up through her as system chancellor and the board. The other thing is that we've been blessed with a tremendously high quality board at the University of Houston. Everything's open, everything's transparent. I've been fortunate enough to have served as chair, and anything I've asked the board members to do in terms of chairing committees and that sort of stuff, everybody steps up and really has the best interest of the system at heart. This year we had a leadership retreat where we brought in an outside facilitator, closed the doors, and the board had what I thought was a very, very meaningful, very direct, very candid, very frank discussion about how we felt we were performing as a board, what things we could do to improve, what things we were doing well, what things we were not doing well. So I think that went a long way toward helping everybody feel like we're all in this together. It's a great system, and each of us has a meaningful part to play in it, so.
Jarvis, before we move on, from that meeting, did you make any decisions about how the board comported itself? Any new committees, axing any old committees or anything of that nature?
Actually, we concluded that we were all doing a fantastic job.
There you go.
And no changes were needed.
You'll invite that consultant back, won't you?
And we hugged each other and went and had a drink, and it was a great day.
There you go. Roberto?
All right. Well, we weren't that kumbaya. In fact, I'm glad Bruce walked out of the room. I tease him a lot because I really care for what he's doing. He's very transformational. But I tease him because of all the issues that have come up from the faculty and the 5 separate colleges. I call him our favorite piñata. Everybody's hitting on him, every single day, and he weathers that so well. But again, if we had not had a unified voice, he couldn't have done that. And it got pretty severe. He got a vote of no confidence one night, and that same night, maybe he fell over. That's Bruce. I wasn't supposed to say that.
He's him out there.
I don't think I was supposed to say that.
God, he had a heart
But
attack.
anyway, before he comes back in the room real quick, that same night, we passed a 24-item resolution supporting him and gave him a new contract and gave him a raise. And that sent out a message that we were not going to cave in to regional issues or issues from each of the campuses. And so that I believe, strengthened our board tremendously. It strengthened what he's supposed to do. But I think the one thing that helped build the support system you're talking about, Buzz, was that instead of evaluating the chancellor on a scale of 1 to 10, with little descriptors and all that kind of stuff, we decided to do charges. So we gave him, he thinks we gave him too many charges, but we've got like about 12 charges that we gave him as a board, saying these are the goals that you have this year to implement. And so he sends out those charges to everybody. So they know that he's not acting unilaterally, that the board has directed him to do this and this is his job, and it becomes their job. And so that's brought in this interdependency with everybody. And so we've gotten to a point where we're able to take more risks and are being able to, again, the system is really starting to come together. We've got, everything's been consolidated into one unified process. So we're excited about that. What the newest dimension is that we added a student trustee. It's the first time we've been able to do that. And it has served us well because we've had a couple of controversies already that deal with students' misunderstanding of some things. And he has helped us tremendously that way. But again, because of that support system that's there, we were able as a board to accommodate a student trustee. And I think we have the only student trustee for community colleges in the state.
One of the things you could consider is in the evaluations that the system head does with the campus heads, is one of the criteria is collaboration with colleagues. That has a profound effect on behavior. Okay, go on to the next one. Balancing central authority with institutional differentiation. You've heard my colleagues here talk about how the campuses are different. Autonomy and creativity. How do you create a system that's a system with enough structure that things get done and they get done in the right way, but at the same time allow for the kind of creativity and the ability to make some mistakes that we talked about earlier? So understanding the mission of all institutions, their service area, programs, and unique circumstances. When I was in my first job as a president, I talked about my university being the best of its kind. It was not very popularly received by the faculty because their idea was to be one of the best major research universities. Best of its kind meant serving the urban region of the east side of St. Louis. Focus primary attention on system-wide policies and priorities. Let the campuses do their thing. Listen to and respect local institutional governance. That means understanding it. It doesn't mean being cowed by it. It means understanding what the cultures are of the various campuses. But don't fall for this trick I mentioned earlier, where I've seen CEOs of major companies sit on a not-for-profit and be told when the budget wasn't balanced and you got to go out and find the money for me, to be told, well, why don't you balance your budget and they're told, well, you don't understand, we're different. That's being cowed by the differences, and you listen to and respect the individual differences, the institutional differences, but at the end of the day, you are in charge. Avoiding a tendency to micromanage a single institution, boy, that's where being a smaller institution in the system is good, because the micromanagement usually goes to the flagship. The system head, treat everybody fairly, create financial incentives. You heard some of those by the coordinating board this morning, did you not? Delineate clearly who has responsibility for what issues, and that's important. Here's what the president does. Here's what the chancellor does. And here's how our vice presidents for academic affairs and all the other top senior people, here's how they work together. And you heard Jarvis talk about how they have a group that works together on those kinds of things. Delineate clearly who has responsibility then. Use data effectively and use the right information. Don't just have it for the sake of information. And the institutional executives understand the reporting relationship. You do report to the system head. If you're the system head, if you don't have an annual review, if your board doesn't require it, you're making a big mistake, because that person isn't reporting to you for long. Help keep the University Foundation focused on the right activities, sensitive to the fact that they are a separate entity, but making sure that things are going okay and that they're providing in a transparent way how they do things, and making sure that the money is spent in a legal and appropriate way. So, my colleagues, what do you have to add to these two?
Well, Buzz, you know, when you have differences across the system and you add money to it, the problem escalates 100 times. We have, you talk about balancing authority with autonomy and creativity. We have a fairly interesting foundation endowment system at the University of Houston. We have an endowment of several $100 million that's composed of those gifts made to the university of $25,000 or more without legal restrictions that we can't manage. We have a UH foundation that accepts all those dollars that we legally cannot manage at the University of Houston Foundation. We also have 7 other foundations. We have 5 colleges that have their own foundation. We have an athletics foundation. And we have, I believe, an arts foundation is the other one. As we talked about a little bit this morning, the Board of Regents has the ultimate fiduciary duty for all those assets. The only assets we directly control, though, are the ones in the endowment. So we have basically 7 independent foundations out there with their own board that have their own idea of how they want to manage their money. They have independent money managers. They have their own investment policy. And we get to sort of, or heretofore, we just got to say, okay, we're kind of looking over you. We know we're ultimately responsible, but we also know that you are independent 501c3s. So now we were able to get each of them to sign an agreement that requires them to provide a certain amount of reporting to us on an annual basis, everything from the 990 to a conflict of interest policy they must have at their board level. That took some time, took some doing, a lot of meetings. When I was chairman, I actually convened a meeting with the chair of each of the foundations. It was a couple-hour meeting. It wasn't a very good meeting. Well, there was a lot of things said in that room that we didn't repeat outside of it. But we walked away from it with the understanding that they knew that we were ultimately responsible and that we needed to have some reporting from them. So an example of a very difficult situation where 8 different entities with a lot of autonomy were able to work together and come to a resolution that we could all live with.
How's it working out? Do you have moments where you're a little bit afraid that something's getting out of hand?
Well, not everybody's is as timely as there should be in getting their reports in. Yeah. And so we'll get a report from the auditor and we'll say, go back and, say something mean or tell them we got to have the report by a certain amount of time, and we usually get it in. The main thing was making sure that we had conflict of interest policies and reasonable investment policies so that the money is being properly handled, because that's what gets you in trouble, sooner than anything else.
Jarvis, do you have enough information that you can get a sense about how much money is being raised on an annual basis and how much subsidy you may be providing? If not subsidy, at least providing rent-free space and other things for our service. Do you have a sense of how all those dollars work?
Yeah, we have, the board gets a report on all of those
Good.
auxiliaries. So we know how much money is being brought in, how much money is being spent. I know a big topic, and you talked about it this morning, is athletics, where you want to know exactly how much money, if any, is being subsidized by the institution. We do get those reports. We know how much that money is. We manage that as best we can through our chancellor, who is very on top of all those issues. But we do have a very, very transparent system.
Excellent. Roberto?
I'm fascinated by what you're doing.
Yeah, I am too.
It's keeping me awake, I know that.
Yeah.
I think the key word here is balancing central authority. When you have 5 separate systems, like for example, we had 5 different computer systems going in our district. Think about the efficiency of that. It was terrible. When you had 5 different catalogs, any operational aspect of our organization, if you multiplied by 5, that's the problem we had. When we gave the charge to the chancellor to consolidate everything, people took it as centralization, taking control, taking power. So the pushback became very, very heavy from the campuses. But as we ran into the as we went into the downturn of the economy, it was obvious we couldn't keep operating the way we were. And so we had to balance the consolidation, repurposing of funds, so that we could become, which is more important than anything, creative. We had been stuck in mud for years in terms of our service to Hispanic students, to black students, to underrepresented populations. Our program was stale. There was nothing going on. And so in order for us to become viable, and I think this is one of the most important things in being a trustee, is you've got to make sure that you have the viability in your financials, that you can start becoming creative and moving forward. So we took all of that consolidation, wrung out as much money as we could out of that, and started becoming creative. And so again, it took 4 or 5 years. Right now, though, all we talk about, when I first came on the board, our financial committee, our ABF committee, and I'm chairman of it now, we would take 3-4 hours to discuss stuff. Because of money and consolidation and so on. Now, the committee that lasts longest is the Student Success Committee.
Good.
Because we have the ability now to move funding around, to repurpose, to address that particular need. And again, we're being more creative.
This is an excellent example of when you're told by an institutional area that says, really, you don't understand our culture, and really, you're violating my academic freedom as the computers are at Campus X. That's when you stop listening.
Yeah.
If you get on a big campus, you'll have 8 or 10 computer czars that are convinced that they need total independence, and it is quite expensive, and you guys
It is.
bit the bullet. Okay, let's go to the next one. Strategic planning. I'm gonna go quickly so we have some time for questions. Overseeing the development of a plan outlining the strategic goals of the system. An implementation plan becomes very important. You have a coordinating board, the 2015. You have an implementation plan for your own system goals, tasks, benchmarks, information to tell you how you're doing. And this all has to fit into the larger scheme. The institutional executives have to align what they're doing with the system strategic plan. That's essential. And if you're not, you don't really have a system. And tell me a little bit about what you see here, folks.
Well, one of the things we did, alumni are clearly one of the #1 components that are key to the long-term success of an institution, both in fundraising and just keeping the positive word out in the community about the university, supporting university functions with giving, et cetera. And we had, much like the foundation system, we had an alumni system that was independent of the university. They had their own board. They did their own marketing. They had their own logos. So you had the university here marketing one way and the Alumni Association marketing another. And the biggest challenge is that we were all fundraising from the same people. So you get something from the Alumni Association, piece of mail, and then you get a piece of mail from the university. So took us about a year to get there, but we slowly began to meet with the board. They had their own independently chosen, nominated board of directors for the Alumni Association. And again, it wasn't easy, lots of meetings. I think it was voted down the first couple times by the alumni board. We eventually were able to convince them to fold that operation into our system. The executive director of the Alumni Association now works for the chancellor of the system. They work also very closely with our advancement office. But that was a strategic plan that we talked about. The chancellor brought it to us. It was key. Each of us sort of took our own constituencies. You know, what board member are you close to? What board member are you close to? Well, you talk to this person. We appeared at meetings, and we were eventually able to get them with some conditions and some time period to join in a unified fundraising effort with respect to dealing with our alumni. So, and we're in the middle of a very large capital campaign right now, and it's working really great. So,
That's a really great success story. The last thing you want is that you focused on a $10 million giver and to have the coach of the soccer team get a $5,000 gift, because that's all you're going to get. And it needs to be coordinated, and you've done it. You've bit the bullet. And as I told one organization that I was working with that was having serious problems with the foundation, much worse than yours, I finally said to them, you have to do something. And the reason you do is because if you don't, when it hits the fan, you're going to get blamed, not the foundation. Where was the board? Even though you may not have the legal authority, you better be involved. Good story. Roberto?
Well, I'm going to go to more fundamental things. One of the things that I'm very proud of is that our trustees have a lot of talent, and we needed to restructure the whole system. So, for example, Trustee Connor, who's our chair, helped us with our bond issue. We floated a $450 million bond issue that finished out on time and recouped about $50 million to add to that total to refurbish the whole system. Trustee Beitzel took the policies. Can you imagine having outdated policies and trying to govern a system? It won't work. And so he took that lead, and in a year or so we have updated policies. We have procedure to update them every month if we need to. And so he did that. I took the lead in doing a strategic plan. How can you have a vision of where you're going with the system if you don't have a strategic plan? I remember opening some of the first material I got from the system when I was appointed, and I looked at the timelines for the strategic plan, and they had lapsed 2-3 years ago. No one had updated them. So we made the decision to make sure that all those structures were in place, and to the degree that whenever we get the agenda item that we're supposed to pass on, it's referenced to our strategic plan. And so those are the kind of changes I think that were very important for us. And you can't manage from disorganization and chaos. You have to have an organizational structure that will support the governance that you're trying to achieve.
Interestingly, that you mentioned that for every kind of major decision that you make, it goes back to how does this fit in with our strategic plan?
Yes, sir.
That really makes a big difference. Or you could say it another way. How does this help students, as you said earlier this afternoon? Okay, performance assessment, setting high expectation of the assistant head. Generally now what we have is a good system has annual reviews of the system head, and once that occurs, that usually involves goals and objectives and discussions about those. And then there should be at least no longer than a 5-year, more or less 360, where other people get a chance to weigh in. That seems to be going very well, but expectations are really very important, because if you say one thing that you want done and it gets done and then everybody's unhappy, then that's not necessarily the CEO's fault. Self-assessment is, you heard Jarvis talk about that. I think that's essential. You really ought to be looking at yourself. You ought to be looking at what the best practices are. And that's one of the things that AGB, one of many, that they do very well. System head, clear evaluation process. Again, I would be sure those are being held. I would be sure that there is a 5-year review that's far more inclusive. And I would include in that collaboration as one of the things that is important to emphasize. Institutional executives, oh, get real excited about being evaluated by the system head. I mean, this is truly, if you're in it to develop yourself and you respect your system head, then you should look forward to it because it'll make you better. If you're too insecure, you're probably not going to make it for long. That is the end, and maybe we could just take questions now. And I'm going to go down at this end so that those of you over there can see me if that's what you want. So let's see what questions that you have. There's a question. Yes, sir.
Now, there are many towns and cities in the state that have both a four-year university and also community college. How do you envision these two institutions with different missions working together to strengthen both institutions and student success?
Well, I'll answer it a couple ways. One, with the systems in Houston, we have pathway agreements. And essentially, the gist of that is the ability for co-location and co-coordination of counseling and advising at the freshman level within the community college system so that there's either a 4-year plan put in place so that when the transfer occurs, you don't have a community college student that's taken 100 hours and then only 60 of them transfer and only 20 of them really relate to the major that they are involved in. So pathway agreements with junior colleges and the community colleges help that. Co-location of those advisors, co-educating of the community college and our advisors on what each offers and coordination of those programs. Out at our Sugar Land campus, we're actually co-located with the Wharton County Junior College where we're moving towards a system out there, and HCC coordinates with us some as well, where we actually are not teaching the downward expansion classes out there. Those are being taught in coordination with our HCC and our Wharton County institutions, and then so we're bringing the upper level classes out there. So it's a direct transfer, again, joint counseling, just to eliminate a lot of the redundancy, a lot of the wasted time, a lot of the wasted resources.
And in our case, it's the same thing. Ditto, I was going to say ditto, it came to my head, because pathways are very important in terms of the interaction between the two institutions. We have a university center also that helps seamlessly transfer students into their programs, Texas Wesleyan, Texas State, other universities. The key point, though, is the two-way collaboration between the faculties, between the two. If you don't have that, and that communication, things will get lost in that pathway journey. Absolutely. So again, yeah, in San Antonio, we've got a very good relationship with both UTSA and A&M San Antonio, even with the University of Incarnate Word. Bruce constantly is dealing with them. There are issues that come up, in terms of our rigor and the rigor that's expected at the four-year institution. But we're in the middle of a real big brouhaha right now, total misunderstanding of what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do to help with the pathway is the coordinating board, the coordinating board has given us 60 hours that we've got to declare for a degree, an AA or AS. And 40 of those hours, or 42 of those hours, are to be core kind of courses. The 18 that the students take, our students just go everywhere with those 18 hours. And when they transfer, sometimes those don't get accepted. And so we're working with the surrounding universities to make sure that whatever courses they take, will transfer. And then we're going to advise those students that if you choose this concentration, that these are the courses will transfer to the university of your choice. So if you're going to Texas State, these are the courses that if you want to go into engineering, for example, that you need to have and that they will accept so that you don't lose any credit at all.
You know, one other point to add to that is you, community college trustees already are involved in this, your outcomes-based funding.
Yeah.
And so it's critically incumbent, and the expectation for your higher education institutions out there, for your institutions, is that that's going to happen this session, or that's on the agenda to be discussed, adding some component of outcomes-based funding in terms of appropriations for four-year institutions. So we're all going to be, monitored, rewarded, if you will, and disincentivized for your students who are not graduating timely. I think the four-year fixed tuition, I think, will help with that. You get students on four-year plans where they know that if they graduate in 4 years, they pay the same tuition every year, and they're guaranteed to have the courses that they need available to them. At the community college level, as I said, they're already 10% of their appropriations is already based on outcomes-based funding. We're going to probably have that higher education four-year institutions. So I think all these pathways are critical for us to, maintain our level of appropriations going forward.
Do you want to add anything to that?
No, it's gonna
Just two things to beware of. Beware of the small state college that wants to be a major research university. That's obvious. Also beware of community colleges that want to be four-year schools. Not cooperate with four-year schools, but to be that. That's going on in Florida as we speak. Other questions? Questions? Yes, there's a question.
Yeah, my question really relates to the conversation that was just had. Why does Texas make it so difficult with this transfer policy? You mentioned the state of Florida. I actually graduated from community college there and moved on to the university. And if we received an actual associate's degree from the community college, the state universities were required to accept our courses as meeting the general requirements, and we immediately moved into upper level, whatever our bachelor's degree program courses were. That was worked out ahead of time so that everybody understood where we were on rigor or what have you, so that we weren't consistently going through 9 million different transfer and pathway plans. If there was one for engineering, one for whoever, this is kind of what it was to get the general requirements done. So I'm curious how we've gone that direction rather than making it more efficient for both students and the institutions.
Can I start to answer?
Yeah, please, Robert.
In our legislative agenda, we're asking for a common course numbering system. We already have it amongst community colleges, but we think that'll be a step in the right direction. The other thing, though, is getting past the faculty's perception, meaning the university's faculty's perception, that the rigor coming out of community colleges is not at their level, and that they have different expectations. So again, going back to the response I gave earlier, there's got to be communication between their faculty and our faculty in alignment, and that's a tough nut to crack.
And I'll add a couple of points. I think Florida may be in this situation, maybe Louisiana, a couple other states. I know there's been some talk about this in Texas, not sure if it's going to happen. Isn't there a central community college system in Florida where everybody's all under one umbrella? Is that Florida, or is that other states?
It is, but let me give you an understanding of that. This was legislated by the state legislature there. They had the political will to do that, and so they've been able to do things that we can't address. For example, why is it not viable for a student that stays in our system for 2 years and gets a degree from us to transfer seamlessly into the system? At the same time, though, they must stay within that 2-year time frame and stay with the community colleges until they complete. So if you look at their completion rates, they're 10 times higher than ours because of that political decision that was reached by that state.
One other thing I'll add to that, and it's just, it's really just a reality. It's a reality. There is always going to be a bit of a competing tension between community colleges and four-year institutions because, you know, we have statistics that indicate that certain community college students do better at our institution. We have statistics that show empirical evidence that show that certain community college students graduate in 4 years. We can almost predict it by major. We can almost predict it by what their GPA was coming out of community college. I mean, that's just empirical data. Now, obviously, there's always going to be exceptions to that rule. And especially as we become more entrenched in an outcomes-based situation, we at four-year institutions have to pay attention to those statistics.
Other
And so
comments?
it's always a balancing test. It's going to be
Yeah.
a balancing test going forward in making sure, I mean, look, no question about it, community college students are a huge, huge percentage transfers of the incoming class at the University of Houston. I mean, we probably had, 4,000 first-time in college students, and the rest of 14,000 were all transfers from around the state from community colleges. So we rely on community colleges. I mean, we have a budget that the board approves, and we count on an incoming class of X numbers. So we're always going to take a healthy portion of them. What we're trying to ensure, both from the university's benefit and the students' benefit, that we're putting students in the best position to be able to have the most compelling and positive experience at the University of Houston. We don't want students, I mean, it's worse for us to bring a kid in that is not going to be able to compete. And if there's any way that we can determine that based on an incoming test or something, we want to know that at the outset and not put those students in that position.
Good job, Jarvis. There's a hand back there, and then I'll get your hand up here, Glenn. These will be the last two, it looks like, because I think I have to make an announcement. There is going to be fresh fruit out there, but there's not going to be a cocktail party, I'm sorry.
On this, and I have worked with Roberto, and we have a group that some of these people might not be aware of, but we have a group of trustees and presidents and chancellors working together with the co-board that started about 1.5 years ago. And I would tell you, in the last 1.5 years, I think we've seen a much better relationship between the trustees group and the president's group. They're working together. It paid off for us in the last legislature. And I think we've got a much better working relationship now with the co-board. And it's my understanding that the co-board is going to help support legislation that would support putting in over a period of time the Common Course numbering. And I think this is one of the biggest things that I'd just like to say to everybody here. Common Course numbering is probably the best thing for the students. I realize there's some problems, but I think we can work them out. And if we just ask ourselves, what's really best for the students, and get the universities and the community colleges working together now like we've got us working with the other groups, we'll make a world of difference with the students. And I think it's up to us, and it can start right here in this room. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
That would be a good one to end on, but we're not going to end on it because Glenn has the last word.
This better be inspirational.
It better be good.
The Honorable Glenn Lewis.
As a community college graduate myself over 40 years ago, it was very easy by just having the two schools communicate with one another. There was no requirement that the college four-year school take certain classes, but the two schools communicated so that in community college I had an advisor who could tell me what they would take and what they would not take and steer me to those classes. And all of them transferred. Just simple communication.
Yeah. There are a lot of examples of different situations than yours. But I think the key, you're right though, is to ensure the communication so that these students know what the standards are, they know what course loads they're headed to, all the information is available, and it's going to be, at the end of the day, it's going to be the best thing for that student. So.
Folks, we've reached that point. We do have time for one more minute. No, okay. That's it, folks. Thank you very much. And thanks to my colleagues.